All right. Good morning, Doug. We are back with questions from members of our private file. The first question is Henry Kissinger, at 100 years old, finally passed away a couple of days ago. What are your thoughts on him? Do you have a eulogy for him, a summary of your view of his life?
Yeah, well, you sent me a warning that would be a question. And I think the questioner used the word, what eulogy might I have for him? And the answer is no eulogy, because that word means good word, literally, from the Greek. And I don't have any good word for the old scumbag. And, only the good die young. Kissinger lives to 100. That's about. So no good words at all. But it's interesting because Kissinger, high IQ and also EQ, that he could socialize and maintain himself among all these criminal personalities. But he's going to go down in history, I think, in the same way as people like Talleyrand and Metternich and Bismarck and Cardinal Richelieu. In other words, as the worm tongue behind the throne that pulls strings and influences the paper mache cutout that really gives the orders. So it's and my experience, very limited compared to his, is that the guy on top can be whoever he might be, but it's the people one level below that are really the dangerous sociopaths and creeps. And that would be Kissinger. And I think it's interesting that he managed to win a Nobel Peace Prize, which is really questionable that they gave it to him. How does that happen? At the same time as he was indicted, justifiably, I think, in a number of countries as a war criminal, which is accurate. So, it's a.
So basically, he's the kind of character that would be behind the paper mache president we have today, who everyone can acknowledge couldn't possibly be running anything. He's the kind of guy who would be behind the scenes, actually pulling the strings.
Yeah. Is there any current equivalent of Kissinger out there right now? Anybody that's got his reach, his connections, and actually his raw intelligence? Certainly not Anthony Blinken, for God's sake.
Or Victoria Nuland. I mean, these people do not seem like they're smart people, not nearly of his caliber.
No, not nearly. I mean, they're evil and money grubbing and power grubbing, but not of Kissinger's character. So, well, we'll see who steps up if they expose themselves.
It seems like he lived during the era of like great diplomats, where at least that was my view of him when he was the way he was presented, to you, is that he was like this, he was this super diplomat who was going around the world. He was responsible for opening China. Is that right?
That's what they say, yes, and influenced Nixon.
All right, but is there anyone like that anymore? That's of that, even of the status diplomatically, not just in the U.S. What's the guy in Russia? He seems to have some credibility. I can't remember the name of the minister.
Well, it's not Putin's second command, Medvedev. Who are we thinking of here? No, but there's nobody of his stature. However much of his stature might have been a creation of good PR in the press, because not having met the old criminal personally, all we really know is what we read about him or see in videos or what other people say about him. So who knows? Anyway, maybe, I say good riddance, but on the other hand, he wasn't a stupid man. And, sometimes stupid people are even more dangerous than evil people. So
yeah,
At least he wasn't stupid.
The guy I was thinking of was Sergei Lavrov, who was
Sergei Lavrov, yeah.
yeah. Seems at least to be intelligent.
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know who's doing that, doing the equivalent type of thing in Xi's China either. Well, anyway, these are all political creatures. They're creatures of the state. And as far as I'm concerned, the state is the great enemy of human beings, the average man. So.
Okay. Well, the next question was this guy shared a documentary. He asked if you saw it. It's an investigative documentary on the gold mafia corruption across Africa and Dubai. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it or not.
Yeah, I did watch it actually. And what do I take away from that? It's that gold facilitates the transfer of money outside of official channels. And that's kind of the bottom line. So that video, which is worth watching on 1.5 speed anyways, so it doesn't take an hour of your time, more or less, is that it doesn't say so, I don't think, but it says that basically the Islamic Hawala system, which is basically a kind of a SWIFT system, where if you know a Hawala person in country A and give him money, he will transfer it to country B for a fee on both ends, and it works just as well as the SWIFT system, actually. But it's off the books, and they don't like that. But the good news about, and of course, I'm no fan of Mohammedanism as a religion or as a culture or anything. I have lots of problems with that religion, or it's more than a religion, actually. It's a whole system of life. But I think it's wonderful that you can transfer money if you have the connections without using official channels. And of course, gold, they point out that you melt the gold down and it becomes completely untraceable, unlike $100 bills. And so anyway, it was basically saying that money laundering is a bad thing. But I draw to everybody's attention that money laundering only became a crime in the 1980s. I mean, before that, it wasn't a crime, and who cared? I mean,
and what is money laundering exactly? Is it just moving money outside of official channels?
Yeah, I think the definition of it is kind of squishy. It's whatever they say it is. It's taking the proceeds of money from an illegal activity, not necessarily an immoral activity in any ways, and muddying up where it came from, so forth. Nothing wrong with money laundering. I mean, it's what privacy is all about. I have no problem with this artificial crime, and of course, so many crimes today are artificial. Like if drugs were legal, which they should be, I mean, because your primary possession is your own body, and you have a right to do what you like with your body, even if it's stupid, which it may or may not be with drugs. I mean, this all depends. So the proceeds of drug trafficking are completely legitimate as far as I'm concerned, as long as force or fraud is not involved. But that's a separate crime.
Right, and exactly. It's one that has a victim.
Yeah, and the other thing with money laundering and, we can't have gold and Hawala transferring things that the authorities don't know about. Because what else? It's all about tax evasion. Nothing wrong with that, quite frankly. Nothing wrong with breaking all kinds of bullshit, arbitrary laws and rules. So I mean, it's interesting that people are doing this, but these people aren't doing anything wrong, in my opinion. So people should watch it and look at it from a moral viewpoint, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, but I kind of got from it the same thing you did, which is that they're setting the stage to paint gold as a tool of crime.
Yes. So we obviously need a lot more regulation and oversight on the part of the authorities. So of course they're the good guys on gold. So
Of course.
I hate people that make these documentaries that do it from an implicit or explicit, shaky or antithetical, actually, moral foundation. I mean, they really don't. I mean, they're adding to the problem. They're not part of the solution.
Yeah. Okay, I'll include a link to that in the description of this video if you want to watch it. Encourage you to check it out. Our next question is, what does Doug think about Panama ordering the shutdown of this major copper mine that was there? I know we've talked separately about other concessions being canceled. There's a guy who participates in a call we're in, Morgan Housel, who's had a mine, I think, in Mexico that they revoked his concession around. Is this a general trend? And what do you think?
Well, that particular deposit, believe it or not, I visited it way back when it was just a deposit before any construction of the mine started or whatever. And it was a financing, and I was involved in it, and I think I made money on it. But that was a long time ago. Anyway, the bottom line is this, and I don't follow these things because look, this is the legal system in Panama, which is basically all bullshit. First Quantum, the owner of the mine, or 90% of the mine, something like that, say it was legal when we bought it and legal when we built it, and they were paying. It's been in production for like 3 or 4 years. Huge mine, giant mine. How much is it producing? Well, the amount that they were paying the government of Panama was something on the order of $375 million per year. I mean, that's pretty sweet for the politicians of Panama, quite frankly, because First Quantum et al. Made an investment of over $6 billion to build this damn mine. That's up front before any income started coming in. So, and I don't know what the who shot John about Panamanian law and what this, this is kind of inside a really stupid game of baseball. They just want to steal more. Actually, it was a deal. It was cut. Was anybody bribed? Who knows? But they say it's not fair. We want more money. That's basically what Panama is all about. So right now, this giant mine that produces something on the order of 1.5%, 2%, I think, of the world's copper supply is shut down. How long will it be shut down? Well, who knows?
Do you see a trend of this kind of activity growing internationally at this stage, or has it always been like this?
I do, because most of the governments of the world are either bankrupt. I mean, like the US government is manifestly bankrupt, although it hasn't declared itself as such. And this is true of most of the governments of the world. Their obligations far exceed their assets, and their outgoings exceeds their income and so forth. So, yeah, and they're always looking for more money, obviously. And this is why in today's world, where governments are so powerful, mining is a crappy business. It's always been a crappy business for lots of reasons we could talk about separately. But today it's more dangerous than ever, because in the old days, like the days of Deadwood, when the Homestake mine was discovered, hey, if you found a gold mine, you found a gold mine, and you could get it into production like tomorrow morning, and it was wonderful. But today, that's just not the way it works for all kinds of reasons. And after you spend millions or billions of dollars to get upfront, to get it into production, that's when the government comes looking for a good part of your income, and then NGOs come up and they want more of it and this and that. So mining is for speculators, not for investors. Putting investment in the same sentence as mining is a mistake.
All right. Someone asked about, the newsletter world is a fairly small news world. And so someone's asking about, how Bill Bonner and Porter and E.B. Tucker and Nick Giambruno and those sorts of guys.
Know them all well, and I love them all. But, we're a subsector of the newsletter world. In other words, all the people mentioned here are essentially ANCAPs. We all take the same ethical and political and philosophical views, generally speaking, not exactly, but pretty much exactly. And so that's what we all have in common. And there's some other guys that I would add into that as well. So, but not all newsletter writers share our philosophical beliefs. There are a lot of people out there that I consider to be complete whores, frankly, that
there are a lot.
aren't bringing anything to the party, but just an opinion as to what stock's going to go up or down. And to me, all these names that are mentioned here and a few guys that aren't mentioned, yeah, we all have opinions on what the economy is going to do and what various markets are going to do. But to me, the essence of the newsletter business is presenting a coherent, philosophically sound view of the world. And that's what people really want. Who needs more bullshit opinions? I mean, so that's the common thread with people he mentions.
And how did you come to know Bill Bonner? Because I think he's like the first guy in this, and the ones mentioned that you knew. How did you come to know Bill?
Washington, D.C., where I more or less grew up along with Chicago. But Bill, who grew up in and around Baltimore and Annapolis, was in D.C., and he was running the something called the National Taxpayers Union at that time. And so we bumped into each other. And so we've been friends since about 1975, which is a pretty long time. That's how I met Bill. And Porter went to work for Bill when he was just a puppy, like he was like 23 or something like that. And, Porter and I always got along very well from the beginning. And then who else is involved? Then EB went to work for Porter, and he doesn't work for him anymore. He's independent and has his own newsletter, which I subscribe to.
He stopped by here earlier this week to visit me on the farm. Actually, it's great to see him. It's great to see him.
It's like we're all one big happy family that are all reading from the same page. And Nick Giambruno, of course, mainly lives in Cafayate in Argentina. And who else did he mention as part of this?
Yeah, those are the only ones he mentioned in this, among these. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a few other guys that, definitely out there that we stay in touch with.
Like Chris McIntosh would be one I'd put in certainly the category.
Yep, Chris McIntosh, absolutely. In fact, there's a number of other guys that write newsletters. I'd say Alex Kreiner, who's a Croatian who lives in Monaco. He's another guy. Say Chris Weber, definitely another guy. I don't know. There's a bunch of people that we're all kind of birds of a feather.
Definitely. Definitely. Okay. Do I recall correctly some story that I think I heard you tell a long, long time ago about uh a connection between you and Friedland, Robert Friedland, that is, and Bill Bonner? Like, were they living together, roommates at some point, or was there something?
No, it wasn't. Friedland, who I met, Jesus, I met Robert. When? When did I meet Robert Friedland? It was in the 70s. I'm trying to think when he was promoting his first real venture, which was Galactic Mines, which was in many ways a disaster, but it was part of Robert's learning curve. No, Robert's never had a relationship really with Bill Bonner.
No.
Robert had a strong relationship with Steve Jobs.
That's right.
They were in India as hippies together for years. I mean, Robert spent like 5 years, something like that, in India, and so did Jobs, and they became like best buddies. And when Jobs founded Apple, Robert, got the equivalent of penny shares because they were good buddies. And Jobs came to Robert's, was it his 60th birthday party or was it his 50th birthday party? Anyway, it must have been his 50th. It was in San Francisco. And his 60th was he rented, I went to both of them. He rented, what are the giant ruins in Cambodia? What am I thinking of? Angkor Wat.
Yes.
Robert rented Angkor Wat for the purposes of his birthday.
What?
Because he was a billionaire then. So that was fun. So Robert's very, very well connected with the high and mighty international billionaire set. And Bill, depending on this and that, is close to being a billionaire, I guess. I don't know. I mean, he's up
Depends
there.
upon how you value Argentine real estate, maybe.
Yeah, and how you value, the newsletters that Agora controls and so forth. But, he's up there. But Bill is the type of guy that doesn't really care about running with the high flyers. It's not his style. I mean, he still likes to go out and build fences with his hands out of stones and put new roofs on decrepit building. He still likes to do that type of thing. Right? That's not Robert's style at all.
No. Okay. What is your opinion of the small principalities in Europe? Liechtenstein, Monaco, San Marino, Andorra, etc., as places to live, or whatever. Do you have an opinion on
there
those?
were more of them, but let's see, which ones are they? Liechtenstein, Andorra, San Marino, Monaco. Okay, I guess those are the four, and they are all independent, real countries that all issue passports, very good passports, I might point out, that are very good for visa-free travel everywhere in the world. And all those places have, like, I don't know, 30 or 40 or 50 or 60,000 citizens, residents. And all the citizens have, at least statistically, extremely high incomes. And I think they're great. I think the world needs not just 4 places like that in Europe, but I think we need like 1,000 of them around the world, maybe 10,000 around the world, little independent principalities that, they're too small for the government to do any harm. Serves no useful purpose for any of them to have nuclear weapons or biological weapons, so forth. I mean, the bigger a state gets, the more dangerous it gets. So these are quite benevolent institutions. Yeah. I'm all for, but you can't become a citizen of any of them. You can forget about that. Too hard. And I've been to San Marino just to visit, and been to Liechtenstein many times. Been to Switzerland. I used to live in Switzerland, of course. And what's the other? Monaco, of course. That's really the high price spread. They're all the high price spread. I mean, you live in Monaco, you're going to be paying a really high rent. Everything's expensive, very expensive there.
Now, Alex Krainer said that during COVID, the way that Monaco handled it was totally different than everywhere else. They said they
Oh,
didn't experience the same restrictions or anything.
oh, hmm. Well, makes sense. I mean, why should they shoot themselves in the foot with that if you're small? Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Next question is about Milei. They're wondering if you still feel sanguine about him. He says, it's becoming too obviously clear he's not what many of us had hoped for. Judging by his actions since being elected, I'd say he's near certainly a WEFer, a Zionist, and a puppet. So what do you think now, he says?
Is he a WEFer, a World Economic Forum? What's the word I'm looking for?
Say an alkalite, an acolyte. Maybe.
Acolyte, yeah. I don't think so. Because, I've been asking myself if through an accident of birth, I personally was somehow in the position that he's in today, the opportunities for corruption and the pull and push pressures from different sectors to do what he's declared as a solid ANCAP as being the wrong thing, what will he do? I mean, who said power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the president of Argentina, it's a president. All these South American countries are democracies with parliaments or congresses or something, but all of them are kind of presidentially oriented. So the president of Argentina actually has a lot more power for the country than the US does. So this is going to be a real moral test for him. I can't believe that he would like or believe the same things of any of these horrible people that show up at the WEF. I mean, if I was in his position and I was invited to show up, yeah, sure, I'd like to meet, as disgusting as I feel about all these people, I'd like to meet them and be able to size them up and see firsthand, as opposed to boots on the ground. Yeah, I like firsthand experiences. So write that off, Yeah. What else has he done here that he's accused of?
Well, actually, let me say something about that first. Is that before COVID, before all of the World Economic Forum was not well known, and what was known about it is it was just a conference where business people got together. That was what I understood about it. It wasn't seen as as what we now associate it with. So just because somebody showed up there at some point does not, I think, automatically, condemn them. I just don't think it does. And if even during the presentation that was recorded with him speaking about it, he was arguing against the state. I mean, he was doing the right thing, and the comments he made on stage at that event, whether he did participate in. So, I think that you gotta be careful about applying that blanket label to everybody who just was put on a web page by that organization. I just don't think that is good. So the other part is they say he's a Zionist and a puppet.
A Zionist and a puppet. Well, this is odd that he grew up as a Roman Catholic, but now he's decided to become a Jew, apparently. I mean, look, I don't understand that. I don't understand being a Roman Catholic. I grew up as a Roman Catholic, believe it or not. I don't understand that. I'm certainly not about, I don't understand it. What's going on in his mind? I don't have a clue. This is odd, though, and a little bit disturbing. So,
yeah, especially the public nature of the just post-election, meeting with the rabbis in Argentina, and then also meeting in New York. I mean, it's just strange. And then he met with Bill Clinton also on his visit to DC. So that's also weird. I don't know what it means, but it's weird.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like Frank Sinatra said, whatever gets you through the night. So if he's more comfortable with rabbis and whatever beliefs he likes about Judaism, that's fine. It's a personal, private thing. I mean, who knows, who cares? But why is he advertising it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. And why is he meeting with Bill Clinton? That'll be fascinating to find out. I mean, how did that get set up?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I don't know. Ultimately, we can only really judge him by what he does.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the problem is with the kind of people that populate the government of, he's going to have counselors that are going to be philosophically sound, other ANCAPs that'll be helpful, but he's going to be pushed and pulled by all kinds of nefarious sources. Well, I guess we don't know.
Don't know. Okay. Recently, Jamie Dimon came out and said, who's the CEO of JP Morgan, and recently sold, I think for the first time, 140 or so million of JP Morgan stock he owned. He's come out and said this winter we'll see closures of major banks. What's your take on this, and could you expand on it?
I think he's probably right, because as interest rates go higher, I mean, these banks have made a lot of loans at much lower interest rates. So whether they acknowledge it or not, I mean, you make a 30-year loan at 2%, interest rates go to 7%, like for mortgages, for instance. The current value of the loan goes to half, a third. I don't know what the numbers calculate out to, but it's a write-off. And this is before there have been massive defaults, which is going to happen in the commercial area where they've office buildings and so forth. And all these banks are bankrupt, frankly. They're just like governments. And it's Europe, US, Canada. So I wouldn't own the shares of any big banks at this point.
And I think that the number came out something that was like recently $650 billion of unrealized losses in the major banks in the US. And that doesn't even include the treasury bonds that the bond, the US bonds that they own, that I believe they don't have to mark to market. They mark to maturity, so they don't have to realize those losses. So this is in addition to those, there's 650 billion in unrealized losses on their balance sheets.
Yeah, which is going to be a real problem if people start withdrawing their money from the banks. Then they need the cash, and yeah, look, the whole banking system is founded on quicksand, with fractional reserve banking, where these banks can not just act as brokers, lending out, borrowing money at 3% from depositors and lending it out short term, fully secured, for 6%. That's what banking used to be about, and charging money for facilitating the writing of checks and transferring money, separate business. I've explained all this in the past. So no, I think it's inevitable all these banks will fail. And of course, the government doesn't want that to happen for all kinds of reasons. So it'll bail them out. And this all ties into the digital currencies and the Federal Reserve becoming everybody's bank and so forth. It's a disaster. But I certainly wouldn't want to own the shares of any bank today that I can think of.
Okay.
And I speak as somebody that is a founding investor with Rick Rule and Frank Trotter in their new bank, which still is not allowed to be a bank.
They're still waiting on that FDIC approval, right?
Yeah, that's probably a write-off. Well, seemed like a good idea at the time.
All right. This guy says Matt replied to a comment not long ago stating that you can reduce the dangers one is exposed to in legal marriage to a negligible risk. I don't respect the church or the state, and my ideal mate would be someone who also doesn't care for the formalities and paperwork. But should this be the sole deal breaker and in an otherwise perfect fit, how would one reduce said risk to negligible? Prenups, etc. I'm told that they're worth as much as toilet paper these days. What's the secret?
Well, I've been around the block more than a few times with people of the female persuasion. And I've just been married once. I guess the answer, first thing is, like with any friend or associate, choose wisely. And that means choose somebody with that you share philosophical foundations with, and somebody who has good character. By that I mean Boy Scout virtues, trustworthy, loyal, etc., etc. That's your first line of defense. Legalistically, because anybody can have a psychotic break, maybe the smartest thing is to put all your assets in an offshore trust, so you don't own it, and they sue you, and well, hey, I don't own it. But that
Exactly.
that's a sign of it's a problem. Harry Brown wrote a book which is still today, and I happen to have it right here because I'm taking it down to Argentina with me in a couple of days. How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. And Harry thought this whole thing out very logically. And he felt that marriage is basically taking the state as a third partner in a relationship between two people. That's quite correct. I feel that way too. On the other hand, people have been getting married for many thousands of years because there are advantages to it of all kinds. And Harry changed his opinion in his later years, mellowed, if you would, on that. I don't know. What's your bottom line? You just got married.
I just got married. Yeah. And I mean, I fundamentally agree that it's actually insane, if you think rationally, to want to invite the state into your life in any way. And so the whole idea of when you get married is that you are, I mean, the idea, just the notion that you have to go and you apply for a marriage license. I mean, and of course it's de facto granted in most cases, but like that basic idea is definitely feels wrong in a lot of ways, and it is wrong in a lot of ways. And the state laws, family law in the U.S. is a disaster. And so if you are subject, if your relationship then is subject to the ever-growing changes of family law, then you can find yourself on, in a really bad position. And there are horror stories all over the internet about how men have been destroyed by it, and they're true. They're definitely true. I think though, there are, I mean, for me personally, if I'm married, and just as a practical example of a benefit of being married, if I'm married in Uruguay, I'm eligible for citizenship here after 3 years. If I'm unmarried, it's 5 years. And also, when you don't get married, a lot of times the way family law is structured in the US is they lots of states and lots of countries have something called common law marriage. So if you're living together period, and a lot of places can have a different time dimension and other testing for it, but the state can arbitrarily decide you actually are married. And so that whole body of family law can apply to you, and you could still, lose assets when not even really a divorce, just a separation. So it makes sense, knowing that those obstacles are in the law, that to get married and essentially to the prenup, if done right, does protect you from the de facto, from what they consider a common law marriage, which could happen if you're just in a committed relationship for a long period of time. And sometimes they aren't worth much more than toilet paper, but that's usually because the argument is made that one or both parties did not have effective legal counsel in advance of signing it. And I think if but you can cover that off pretty easily. I mean, with Jane, I hired a separate lawyer for her who I didn't know, who has represented her in our process. And I think, so you have to do that. So the bottom line is that the state, the ideological view of not inviting the state into your life, and so not wanting to get married in that traditional way or that legal way, makes sense. However, it does not free you from the state's view of whether or not you're married, and thus the consequences of being married. So you got to recognize the full spectrum, I guess, of risks. And then you plan around them. And of course, there are structures that you can use to protect assets, like you said, a trust, foreign or even domestic, that is not in your control and thus not your asset and would not, qualify if there was if for some reason there was an issue with the prenup. Now, if you have kids, all of those issues are outside of a prenup. That changes the nature of things fundamentally. You have obligation to support those kids beyond that, according to the law. But there are lots of things you can do to protect yourself, for sure.
Yep. I think you're 100% correct on all that. I agree with you completely. But it seems like most young men and young women get into marriage way too early, and they don't understand enough about what they're dealing with the other person and so forth. So, I've read things, because of course we've been talking about this book about what you should do instead of going to college and so forth. And a couple other people have written books that kind of touch on it, and they seem to think that you should get married early. Well, I think that's a huge mistake. I think it's idiocy. If I'd married somebody that I was infatuated with in my teens or early 20s, it would have been a disaster. So
yeah, I think their argument in that one, I think we talked about it before, was, and I didn't read the book, but it was fundamentally that it focused the person on, trying to stay stable and then save and be more intelligent. But, you don't need to be married for that. You just need to have a mature outlook on how you economize your actions, to save money, to plan for the future, all of that. It's just not to, and I get, when you have a family, I suppose it forces you to think about the future. And so maybe that the byproduct of that is maybe you might accumulate more wealth, but the alternative is you just have a mature view of the future and be planning for that now, and not just living for today, just like a child. You don't have to be married for that.
makes sense to me. And historically, marriage had little or nothing to do with love. It was an economic relationship, and of course, in lots of parts of the world, it still goes on today. This is why the parents negotiate the marriage. And the nature of the marriage is a lot different than we have in the West. Your parents put you together, and then, if the male wants to go out and sow wild oats, well, that's outside of the economic relationship of the marriage. And so you can't look at this just from our cultural point of view as well.
Yeah, I met a Sikh at a conference. Maybe it was a Casey Research Conference a long time ago, and somehow we got on the topic of marriage, and he told me how long he'd been married, and then he mentioned that his marriage was an arranged marriage, and he discussed the virtues of that setup for a long time. He thought it was a wonderful arrangement, and that you had basically the entire family invested in the relationship, and so when there were issues, you had, because the parents on both sides were bought into it, that they were like, no, you're not going to drop a nuclear bomb into our world. You just got to get over this. You got to move on. You got to figure it out. So I'm not sure I'm sold on that idea, but I definitely changed my view, and that it wasn't just like some barbaric concept, that there was actually some real meaning to it, and it does actually work.
And of course, the Mohammedans, it must be written in the Quran or certainly in the Hadith or the Sunnah. I don't know, but you could have up to 4 wives if you're a Muslim, as long as you treat them all equally and support them and so forth. Well, it seems to work for more or less for 1.5 billion people. And of course, America's homegrown version of Islam, Mormonism, kind of the same deal. So.
Yep. Okay. Next question. Talking about gold miners. He says, in Gold Junior Resources, the companies talk about 2 concepts: indicated and inferred resources in the ground. Can you explain the difference between these two, and how do they calculate those numbers?
Yeah, well, it's not exactly that way. You've got two classifications of what's in the ground or believed to be in the ground. They are resources and reserves. Those are the two big things. And resources, they can, depending on the degree of certainty that you have something there, a resource is something that's, the mineral is known to exist, and it can be indicated where there's been some research, or inferred where it's guesswork. But what you really want are reserves. And the two big, there's actually three divisions of both of these, but indicated and inferred for resources are the terms most often used, and proven and probable for resources, proven and probable for reserves. And if it's proven, that means that drill holes have to be put in a certain spacing and so forth, that you know that the ore is there. And you know its grade. And importantly, you calculate the costs of getting it out with everything, and then it becomes a reserve. And if it's proven, maybe you've got 50-meter or maybe 50-foot spacing between the drill holes. And if it's probable, well, maybe it's a little wider spacing, and you can't be totally sure, but you're pretty certain. So it's
so when they're doing these new drilling these new holes, a lot of times it's to move things from the probable to the proven category of reserves.
Yes, and you want to do that, like in the Panama deposit we talked about earlier. Before you commit to spending billions of dollars, you want to be pretty sure that it's going to be there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. In one of the recent podcasts, Doug was grousing about his family. I think it was his niece and nephew, how not one of them holds his values. My question is, how did a little of Doug not rub off on any of those family members? Doug's successful and accomplished. What chance does the common man have to convince our family of any idea outside the mainstream narrative if Doug wasn't able to do that?
Well, my opinion is that family, where you're born, is an accident of birth. I mean, I could have been born a poor black sharecropper son, like Steve Martin in that movie.
Exactly.
So, this gets back to nature over nurture. And I'm a great believer in nature over nurture as well. So I don't have any automatic affinity for my family, and philosophically, and for whatever reason, I think I've been right. I'd rather adopt my family, people that I actually share values and philosophy with, than just the random distribution of genes and whatever. So that's my feeling. And just because people are genetically closer to you, does that mean that they're going to think more like you do, or what you'd like to think? Well, listen, there are some families that works out. I don't have the answer, quite frankly, but I find my family having been a lot of pluses, no question. But as a family per se, I think it was pretty dysfunctional. But
sounds normal. Sounds like it's normally that way, to be honest.
I think most families are probably dysfunctional on some level.
Yeah, even when they're good for a while. I a friend who's really good family when the like kind of the patriarch was alive, and then it's like, as he passed away, and then the next generation was a little bit more dysfunctional, and then the generation after that, seems like completely dysfunctional. So I don't, it just, the second law of thermodynamics wins again, I think, even in that situation.
Yeah, whether it's a family or a nation state. And of course, if the patriarch is successful and accumulates assets, then a lot of them are going to start scrambling and cheating and lying and stealing with each other because they want the assets. And
Exactly.
so you just do the best you can.
Good advice for everything. Okay. Next one, just have a couple more questions left. So next question, he says, I hate to beat a dead horse, but the thought of 2030 and you'll own nothing and be happy has triggered the mind virus of contentment in me. Ironically, 2031 was our arbitrary target lifestyle change date, I guess, for his retirement. What more do I want when honestly we have much more than we need? The call for adventure lurks behind every opportunity, and the itch to try something new is the siren song. So we're far from wealthy, but can radically change lifestyles and be free of work at any time. I now struggle with more opportunities than I have time for, and the ability to earn over 7 figures plus if I wished at any time. Money has become like bites of cake. The first bites are delicious, but slowly they lost their appeal, and more doesn't make me happier. I have an 18-year-old son, and I'm inclined to give him some of the opportunities, but I'm inclined, like J. Paul Getty's father, to arbitrarily take 60% of the value, or let him figure it out and take it all. I have clients with wealth, 10 million, 50 million-ish, that are 70-plus-year-olds, hell, even 80-plus-year-olds, that daily engage in the game of acquisition and accumulation. They seem stuck, and I fear their fate. I'd like to know Doug's take on balance and perspective.
That's a very interesting and well-phrased question. God, with many angles of attack. Well, first of all, it was interesting that he said that he's got an 18-year-old son, which you do as well. And, to me, money is just a means to an end. And he's quite correct. It's marginal disutility. That 50th bite of the cake isn't nearly as tasty as the first bite of the cake. No question about it. Yeah, and you don't need it as much. And so the question is, at what point is the bag full enough? Well, there actually is a point. I think you can arbitrarily pick a number in today's world, depending on various things. And you get enough money. And, if you're going to manage it and not lose it, which is never fun, you got to spend more and more time managing it. And there's no easy answers. But the first thing is, what do you do? What do you do with the money? Because you're going to shed this mortal coil. And if you've got kids, well, first of all, as we were talking about, I think we've talked about this quite a bit in the past. I would counsel the kid at 18, don't go off to college, which in today's world is a corrupting influence, total misallocation, maybe a waste, maybe worse than a waste of both that 4 valuable years of time and a lot of money involved besides. So that's number one, and that's a whole other question. Well, I'm glad you got a lot of money. Listen, that's important. I think you owe it. If you're going to have kids, you owe it to the kids to be as successful as you can. As we live in the material world, and so you want to conquer the material world and be a good influence from that point of view. That's number one. I mean, I don't know. This is such a big question.
What do you think about, he says he has so many opportunities coming his way, and he thinks of, perhaps he should give those opportunities to his son, or do as he says, as J. Paul Getty did, where he passes them on to his son, but, demands 60% of the benefit of those. Like, what do you think about that?
If you really have significant assets, what are you going to do with them? First thing you got to do is keep them out of the hands of the state to the best degree you can. So you can structure things legally or illegally, various ways, so the state doesn't benefit from them, or benefits as little as possible. But then what do you do with it? Well, two alternatives. You can either devolve your money upon other people, or you can give it to institutions. And I think, generally speaking, it's a big mistake to give it to institutions because, parasites and bed bugs are just drawn to institutions. That's what happened with Carnegie and Ford and all these things, where just the worst kind of people take over the institutions and use the money for what I think are destructive purposes. So I prefer giving it to well-chosen people and hope that they will do the same thing, when their time to join the choir invisible arrives. That's what I think.
What do you think of the people who are, in late stages of life, worth a lot of money, and still are daily engaged, as he says, in the game of acquisition and accumulation? What do you think about that?
I think you got to fill those idle hours somehow. So nothing wrong with that. I mean, keeping active, being productive, creating more wealth, nothing wrong with that. But you got to decide, basically, do we live in a material world, or is there an element beyond the material world? Opinions differ on that. But I think it's rather unseemly, frankly, when somebody gets to a certain age, to still be out there grubbing for more money. I mean, it's a balancing act. Aristotle said it. There's the golden mean on almost everything, and some people just want more. And I mean, that shows a character flaw. And other people, golden mean, that's all you can do within the context.
Yeah, I mean, just
other things I've said, I think.
Yeah, I'm with my son right now. We're reading Safeteen's Principles of Economics book. And so a lot of marginal utility conversation, and you bring up the marginal disutility or whatever of additional money earned. And it almost seems like, because the basic economic framework, the economic motivation of continuing to acquire at that late stage, like where that's the dominant activity, it's how you're economizing your time and energy. It defies economic reason, and so it almost hints toward us, as you said, a character issue or a psychological aberration of some kind.
Yeah, but this is something that people should actively think about, and try to plan for. I mean, look, it's problematical because I'm married. So what happens? Well, your wife, depending on the tax laws and all this, but basically, you kick the bucket and your wife gets everything. Well, another reason to choose a wife wisely.
Yeah. Okay. Last question for today. Given the precarious situation with global food supplies, what does Doug think about an investment fund strictly dedicated to livestock and soft commodities? He says the physical, not the strictly futures.
Well, I can't help myself from maybe getting involved. We haven't even talked about this with a company in Argentina that's small and maybe could become big at this point. But it's all about management and so forth. And it's a business that is time consuming. And how much time do you want to spend making sure the business, I think if you want to speculate easily in Argentine agriculture, there's a company called Crasud. And it's run by, he's a Jewish guy named Eduardo Elstein. And, he apparently runs it well and honestly. Although I had another another member of the Jewish community down there. I was very close to this guy for many years, and he didn't like or trust Elstein, and he was a fellow member of the tribe. I've never met Elstein, so I don't know. But I guess Cressud is kind of the go-to Argentine real estate investment. I've got to look at the company. I haven't done that yet. So much of it depends on how good, bad, or indifferent Milei is. I hope Milei does what he's indicated that he was going to do.
Doesn't have to do much to get the government out of the way there and unleash the creative power and the resources that are there. That's the big thing about Milei. Doesn't have to be perfect or even close to it. He just does a few things and it's going to be really good for Argentina.
Yeah, just getting rid of the peso and the inflation and the theft that goes on because of the fact it's a worthless piece of toilet paper that the government officials use actively to steal from. I mean, that alone is big. And getting rid of, lots of completely worthless agencies and putting their employees out on the street and abolishing welfare, so they can't go on welfare. So they'll have to do something, sweep the streets, or well, it doesn't matter what they do. I mean, die in the streets of starvation. I don't really care, frankly. I mean, that's perhaps unaesthetic, but
yeah, but you'd think if those are the choices, they would make better choices, right? So die in the streets or get to work, they'd probably work.
Probably work. That's right. So listen, I'm a great believer in justice, which is often not really pleasant. And justice is all about getting what you deserve. So if you work hard and you save and you try to make things better, I'd say you deserve wealth and good things. And if you don't, you deserve the opposite. And if you can be a scumbag and still rise in the world, like government people often do, that's simply unjust.
Right. And it seems to me the state is basically one of the big problems philosophically with the state is that it distorts the feedback loop of good conduct not producing fruits, and bad conduct producing fruits, So like when that's distortion is there, people make bad decisions because they're looking at the feedback loop.
Yeah. And one of the big problems that we have philosophically in the world is that people actually acknowledge the validity of the state. It should exist. It's not part of the cosmic firmament. It's an arbitrary institution. And it can and should be abolished. So I hate it when people talk about, well, the Russians should do this. Well, who's the Russians? It's the Russian government. We, speaking of Americans, should do this. Well, it's talking about Washington, D.C. and these parasites that circulate around the Beltway. You got to get this idea of the state out of your mind.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. Thank you very much. I know you're traveling back to Argentina next week, so maybe we'll get some boots on the ground update from you.
And I'll be just across the Plate River from you, and I'll see you in a few weeks, actually.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.